which for us, it's the end of March, which for us means that it's basketball season, the NCAA basketball tournament. I don't know if you are fans of the NCAA basketball tournament, but it is happening right now, and already, like, everybody's brackets are completely busted. How many of you filled out a bracket for the NCAA basketball tournament? Okay, quite a few of you. I read this morning that 0 perfect brackets remain on ESPN, Yahoo Sports, several other outlets. There have been major bracket busters this week alone, right out of the gate, which is just kind of unique. And the main one was St. Peter's, a 15 seed, beat the University of Kentucky, a number 2 seed. Now, I am a University of Louisville fan. That's where I grew up. And our arch rival is the University of Kentucky, which is my wife's team. So I am treading thin ice today with how excited I am that happened. St. Peter's, the Peacocks is their mascot. And so I just got to thinking about sometimes when you use logic to pick the who's going to win the bracket, it doesn't always work out the way that you think it's going to work out. And so maybe you picked your teams because you have done a lot of research on the different teams, and you know their records, and you watched a lot of college basketball this year. I love college basketball, but I got to be honest, I watched very little college basketball this year. I just think with everything going on, it's just something that I didn't pay as much attention to. So if you're like that, then we kind of resort to other methods to picking the teams that will win. And maybe you went by the seedings, like who was the number 1 seed or 2, or you said, okay, I'll kind of gauge it off of that. Maybe if you had a 7 and an 8 or something like that, you would say, okay, I might flop there. But you kind of followed the seedings. Some people go by the colors of the teams. How many of you chose your bracket? You're not going to raise your hand. But you chose your brackets. I really like the color of this team. That's why I will go. You know what's funny is when people do that, they often have better brackets than I do, based off of the colors. And one of my favorite is when they base it off of the mascots. You ever base your bracket off of who? Woo, we got a woo for that one. Based off of the mascots. But I bet you didn't pick the St. Peter's Peacocks, because that's who beat the University of Kentucky. Did I tell you that? Did that happen? I don't know if I mentioned that already. But I also noticed a trend, like St. Mary's won, St. Peter's won. I'm kind of thinking that there's a trend here, like there's a biblical trend. Maybe I should change my team's name to St. Louisville. I don't know. Just thinking about it. But my bracket is destroyed every year because I always choose Louisville to win the whole thing every year, which just doesn't work out very often if you think about that. In fact, it didn't work out at all this year because they're not even in the tournament, so I have to own that as well. But one of the things that makes March Madness a thing, why it's madness, is because you have all of these teams that, under the pressure of the moment in the tournament, with TV stations broadcasting their games to the entire nation and arenas full of thousands of people, the pressure really gets to those teams in the moment. And you'll have a team like the University of Kentucky or others who had very high seeds, and yet the pressure causes things to change, and suddenly you have a major upset because of the pressure in the moment. I mean, I was watching last night, St. Peter's, that same team was playing. They have a guy on their team that has over 90% free throw percentage. He makes 90% of his free throws, and I think it's more than 90%. So that guy is clutch. He never misses a free throw. But last night, he missed 2 in a row. That never happens. You know why it happened? Pressure. He's in front of a huge crowd. There's lots of pressure. And so we're kind of using this theme to talk about pressure in our own lives. And how can we be better under pressure? Before I dive into the message, just 2 things I want to reiterate from earlier. First off, that connection card that was on your seat. If you are new around here, this is a great place to connect. People love this church. They love the friendliness, the welcoming environment, the community groups. There's lots of ways to get connected, but the first step is very simple, and it's very easy. Just fill out this connection card, and we have a gift for you in the lobby. We would love to give you. All you got to do is fill out this connection card, stop there, turn that card in, and we got a gift, and we would love to meet you and say hello. I'll be there, and I would love to meet you as well. And then also, there's a lot of great things coming up for camp, for our family ministries and our student ministries, and we talked about that earlier. But a great event that's coming up for our students is our student conference. Our student conference is in just a couple weeks. We're going to take all 4 of our physical campuses right here in Dallas-Fort Worth. They're going to be under one roof together, all of our student ministries all together. It's the first time that's ever been done. So we're excited about that and the collaboration across all of the campuses. It's a high production event, and we want our students there. So if you have students in your household, or if you know of any, spread the word. It's coming up in just a couple weeks, and the price is pretty low. It's only $39 a kid. That covers the entire conference. And so we wanted to make that approachable for as many people as possible. So please check that out, and you can sign up for that on our website. But today I want to continue talking about being better under pressure. Now, some of you, when I talk about pressure, you really resonate with that because you are under a lot of pressure right now. And maybe it's pressure at home. Maybe it's pressure in your relationship, your marriage. Maybe it's pressure at work. Maybe it's pressure among your friends, social media. I don't know, whatever it is. Maybe there's a lawsuit that you're going through that has pressure. And so the first thing that I want to talk about today is that pressure shows no partiality. Pressure shows no partiality. There are some of us that can totally relate to the idea of pressure in your life right now. Now, others of you, you're really good under pressure. You're the Kobe Bryant of pressure in the workplace. You know, give me the situation, I'm going to score, I'm going to follow through. You're the Luka Doncic of pressure. Like, I'm clutch, I've got ice in the veins, and you're the person that is called on when the thing needs to happen at work or in the office, at home, in the neighborhood. People turn to you under pressure. But this first point that I want to land on today and launch from is what I meant, is that pressure shows no partiality. And there are some of you that if you entertain too much pressure in your life, it will set you up for the biggest falls, for the biggest collapses, because people didn't expect you to collapse, and that actually becomes something that you become very proud of, and so you take on too much pressure. That's why we're all talking about the University of Kentucky losing that game to the Peacocks. Like, how did that happen? Because you've got this historically storied program that had a great season, so strong, so talented. They handled the pressure so well. And when the collapse came, it was over every news network, every story about the NCAA tournament. And you know the same thing is true in your life. There are giants in your life, people that you look up to, who you never thought would collapse, who you never thought would cave to the immense pressure on top of them. And so I'm just telling you, if you are entertaining too much pressure in your life, you are setting yourself up for a major collapse and a major failure. Pressure shows no partiality. You cannot escape pressure. Social media adds pressure. I think students are under a lot of pressure these days to fit in or to measure up or to have as many followers as everybody. There's a lot of pressure in this day and age, and nobody can escape it. I don't know if you remember a few weeks ago, there was the Russian skater in the Olympics, and she was talked about as one of the greatest skaters, maybe of all time, but certainly of this time. And she was just flawless all the time. Then there was the controversy where they found that she had tested for banned substances that she had taken, but they still allowed her to compete. And she was the best. And yet in her performance, she fell like 4 times. Somebody who was the best and who never flinched, never caved 4 times in that moment because of the pressure, so much pressure from her country and from the world, more than she had ever had to go through before. Pressure shows no partiality. It hits all of us. Even in the Bible, many of the biblical heroes, we were even singing about some earlier, weren't we? They caved under pressure if they didn't pay attention and respect the pressure that came against them. The Apostle Paul, one of the biggest heroes of the New Testament, said this when he wrote one of his letters to the Corinthians. He said, "We don't want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, about the troubles we experienced in the province of Asia. We were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so that we despaired of life itself." And I don't really know what Paul means by that, but it sort of sounds like he didn't want to live anymore. The pressure is too great. I wish life was over. And maybe you've never said that, but you might know somebody who has. This pressure is too great. I don't even want to live anymore. Maybe you've felt that. Maybe you have said that yourself. Everyone feels pressure. It might be pressure to keep your house clean or to do the laundry or to manage the dishwasher and all the dishes and the kids. It might be to get your son or daughter onto the travel team or to make sure that they get the scholarship that they need. If you're a student, it might be the pressure to get the right grades so that you can get into the school you want to go to. You might also feel the pressure as a student to be like Jesus in an environment where that's not really encouraged. You might feel pressure in your relationship to do things that you otherwise would not want to do. Pressure is something we all face. And number two, another danger of pressure. This will kind of build on it if you want to follow along and write these down. Number two, when margin decreases, pressure increases. When margin decreases, pressure increases. When you don't have enough time, when you don't have enough space, when you don't have enough resources, when your margin gets tight and narrow, the pressure builds. Andy Stanley calls this a lack of margin. Do you have room in your life? Do you have space in your life? There's a really interesting verse that I ran across this week in the Psalms. Psalm 119, 143 is the verse. It says this, and it's a prayer to God. As pressure and stress bear down on me, I find joy in your commands. As pressure and stress bear down on me, I find joy in your commands. Now, I thought this was so interesting because if I were to come up with Luke's solution for pressure and stress in life, this is not the solution I would have thought of. The commands of God help relieve the pressure and give joy and freedom where pressure and stress are overbearing. That's a really interesting solution to me. So I want to talk about this a little bit and break it down. Let's start with that word pressure right there. This word literally means a tight, narrow space. There's no room to move. It's tight. It's narrow. And if you know the story, for those of you who don't know it, you can go look it up because it's kind of a funny story. The story of Balaam's donkey. This word is used when it's not very often you hear about Balaam's donkey, is it? But this word is used when the angel blocks the path and the donkey cannot get through. It says there's not enough room. There's not enough room to get through, which you have experienced if you've ever been driving down I-35 through a construction zone and there's the cones or the barrels or the concrete barriers that shift the lane. Have you ever done that next to a semi? It's scary. There's no shoulder. There's no margin. There's not much space. There's not much room for error. Think about that. This word, pressure, the same word in Hebrew is used at times to talk about sailors sailing through a strait, which is where lots of water exchanges from one sea to another, from one ocean to another. And I don't know if you've ever watched like those little shows about Alcatraz, and they'll try to figure out what happened to those prisoners that escaped from Alcatraz, and they talk about how bad the currents are there, coming in and out of the bay back out to the ocean, and the currents are so strong nobody could survive them. So they talk about sailing through a strait and how dangerous it is because there's a lot of water moving through, and it's a dangerous place to be. And then, of course, I think of the movie 300, which I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about that from the pulpit because it's pretty bloody. But, man, I love that movie. But I can't recommend it, so don't watch it. But that movie is a graphic interpretation of a real story, a true story, where a small group of Spartans fought off a vast Persian army. Why? Because they lured them into a tight, narrow space where their army could not maneuver, and they slaughtered them. Why am I telling you this? Because you have an enemy, Satan, who lures you into places that are tight and narrow, and there's lots of pressure, and he deceives you in order to conquer you. James talked about this, the half-brother of Jesus. And I'm going to talk about that later on in the message, but he talked about how Satan is one who prowls around looking to seek and destroy. Do not be deceived. He wants to draw you in and slaughter you in the moment of deception, to get you into a narrow space where you don't have a lot of room to move. That word that we translate pressure in that scripture we just looked at, and I said that it's tight and narrow. Did you know that it's more often in the Old Testament? 37 times it's translated enemy. 17 times it's translated trouble. And so I just want you to think, when you have too much pressure in your life, think that's trouble. Too much pressure is my enemy. Why? Because your options are too limited. You need to get some space. You need to get some margin, or else you are going to collapse. One of the reasons we don't have very much margin in our lives is because we struggle with the ability to say no. We struggle with the ability to say no. And I get it. Many of you are where you're at in your careers and in your life because you said yes, and you followed through. And you're the person that people turn to because you will say yes and you will follow through and you will achieve things. But if you don't start to say no to some things, if you say yes to everything, you will not have the space and the time and the capacity to do those things. And then you will fail because you said yes to something that you did not have the time or space to do. Now, God really addressed this issue right out of the gate. In the Garden of Eden, Genesis chapter 2, we find God has created Adam and Eve. If you don't know the story, God created Adam and Eve and placed them in this area we call the Garden of Eden. And he said to them, you are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die. And he gives them all of these choices. You can say yes to all of these things. There's just one thing that you say no to, which that really trips some people up. And you think, well, why would God introduce something into the mix that if they chose it, could just cause all of these problems? It's a really simple but complicated answer. Free will, the ability to choose. If you don't have the ability to choose, then love does not exist. You can't love if you can't choose. And so right here from the get-go, God introduces the idea that you must say no to something to get something better. Sometimes we have to give up something to get something better. And listen, I don't want to give up stuff. I want to do all the things. I want to have all the things. I want to go all the places. But there's just not enough time. You must give up something in order to get something better. There's not enough time. Your lack of margin probably isn't a discipline issue. Now, for some of you, it might be. You need to be more disciplined. But for most people, it's literally a time. It's a time issue. If you went to work and looked through every email and every task and thought, I need to reply to this as intentionally as possible. I need to be at every meeting and to be present and to follow through on all the tasks and assignments that are given. I need to follow up on every prospect. If you listed out everything you need to do at work, there's not enough time for you to do it. And then if you were to go home and to think about, what do I need to do to make sure that my spouse or my kids or my friends or my roommates actually feel loved, that I could choose? I would choose them and say no to other things. If you were to think that through, all the things I need to do to make my wife and kids feel loved or to feel like they're important, that I would be around them so much that they would be like, can you just go away? Can you imagine if you were around your family so much that they were like, can you just go away? Like their needs are completely met. There's not enough time for you to do all of that. And then if you were to think through your personal health, like, what do I need to do to make sure I'm healthy and that I'm good? There's not enough time. You must say no to some things in order to have other things that are better. Sometimes you give up something to give something better. There's not enough time. And so if you don't pay attention to the importance of this, it will lead to the third danger, which is that pressure can lead you to do things you would not normally do. It's when you're under immense pressure that people cut corners and they lie, they cheat. Under immense pressure is when students first vape or take the first drink. It's under pressure that couples will sleep together and do things that they otherwise would not have done. It's under immense pressure that you do things that you eventually come to regret. Great pressure leads us to crumble. And if you are not paying attention, it is the time when you are most susceptible to sin. And your enemy knows this. Like I said earlier, he lures you into a tight, narrow place in order to deceive you and to conquer you. Under immense pressure is when marriages fall and addictions overtake and unwise decisions are made and hurt happens. And James, the brother of Jesus, half-brother of Jesus, talks about this in his letter. James chapter 1, verses 14 through 16 says, each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. Then after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. Don't be deceived, my dear brothers and sisters. Have you ever deceived yourself into thinking that your sin was okay because of the pressure? Have you ever felt so emotionally pressured that you justified spending too much time with that person you should not be spending time with? Have you ever felt so drained and pressed that you justified visiting the website that you normally, under circumstances where you were full and thriving, you wouldn't do that? Have you ever justified lying to somebody because you thought, I'm in too narrow of a position, the only way I can get out is if I lie? Under immense pressure is when you are most susceptible to sin, and we deceive ourselves, and our enemy deceives us and lures us into a tight and narrow space and convinces you that the only way out is to do something you never would do otherwise. The danger number 4 is that pressure causes competition amongst the things that we love the most. And this is where, when you find pressure causing you to do things you wouldn't normally do, it's not just you that suffers, and it's not just sin that happens. It's those that you love the most who get hurt, isn't it? Of course. If we were to make a bracket of the things that are competing for our time and our affection and our attention, I mean, maybe it looks something like this, and maybe you would make your own bracket and it would be a little different, but you get the idea. Like, who's going to win in the competition between your work and your spouse? Who wins in the competition between your son and your daughter? Or God versus anything? Who wins in the competition between your hobby and your family? Who wins in the competition of God or work? Or the competition between your hobby and the church? Or the competition between your spouse and your kids? And maybe to answer this, it's kind of a difficult question to answer, but to answer who would win in these areas, or who is winning in these areas, you might answer the question, well, who feels cheated in your life? Who in your life feels cheated? And maybe cheated is too strong of a word. So who feels like they're losing in your life? When you hear the complaints, or when you listen to what they say to you about your job or your life or whatever's going on, or when you see the look in their eyes, or you evaluate their heart, who feels like they're losing? Who feels like they're losing in your life? I bet it's not your job. I bet it's not your golf membership. It might be somebody in your home. It might even be your God. Feels like they're being cheated when it comes to all the things competing for your time and your attention and your affection. Now, I know that a lot of the reason that you choose the different things in that bracket is because of those very people that you love. But here's a perception is reality moment. It is not enough for them to be your priority. They must feel like your priority. You might say, I'm going to work, I'm doing the meeting for my family. I understand it, I get it. Listen, pastors' families are most susceptible to this. I grew up as a pastor's kid. My dad constantly had to fight the competition battles between church, home, family, and all of those things. You have to manage. This is difficult. But he did make me feel like the priority. And I thought that was really important. How many of you, I know a lot of you grew up in pastors' families or pastors' kids, missionaries. You might relate to that. And so I'm just pointing out that even I and others in the church, we're supposed to be good at this. We're not. It's hard. And so you must not just make them your priority, you must make others feel like your priority. If you don't, then your relationships will suffer. And so I just want to give you a couple solutions today, and then we're going to continue in the coming weeks. But one reason why relationships suffer and the wrong things win in our lives sometimes is simply priorities. If we don't get our priorities right, our relationships will suffer. And so one thing that we have to do is constantly reorient and reprioritize our lives. And it's very simple, but difficult to achieve and to actually put into practice. But the order is very simple. God first, family second, job third. God first, family second, job third. And if you're married or you have kids, then when we get to that family section, that means your wife or your husband is before your kids, spouse, and then your kids. If you get that out of order and your kids before your spouse, then eventually they move out, and that's where a lot of couples experience a lot of difficulty because they don't know each other, they can't relate because their relationship was dependent and prioritizing their kids. So you must prioritize your spouse, then your kids. God first, your family, your spouse, your kids, then your job. And you say, well, how can I make these things happen in my life? I'm just going to give you a couple of practical options. One is to simply have a calendar meeting, some sort of regular calendar meeting, just where you look at what is coming up and you let your spouse speak into it. You even let your kids speak into it so that they understand that they have input into what is important in your life. Because whenever you talk about that meeting that's coming up on Thursday night and you have to mess the game for it, and you say, hey, listen, this is an important meeting. What do you want me to do? And you let them speak into it because they might say, hey, I know this is unfortunate, but I understand that this is important. So you go to that meeting. You say, okay, they have now bought into what's going on and they've spoken into it and they feel valued. They feel like you care about their opinion and you have made them a part of the decision moment. They might also say, hey, listen, you've messed too many games. You got to say no. And that's in the moment where you have to have the discernment and wisdom of God to say, okay, what's going to win in the competition of this moment? So just a regular calendar meeting of some sort. I don't think you have to get over detailed about that. But just to say, hey, here's what's coming up, and I value your input. You're the most important thing to me. So speak into my life and my rhythms, which is going to lead directly into what we said earlier. Sometimes you just have to say no, and you have to practice saying no. And you might have to not go to that meeting or go to that thing so that you can prioritize God or your family or your neighbor over yourself. And then the third thing I just want to mention, and this is going to come totally out of left field, but I think fasting is a very important practical way to build priorities in your life. Because when you fast, all of the things and the pressures that have been distracting you and crushing you are narrowed down to one thing. I'm hungry. I want to eat something. I don't care about all the other stuff. I just want a donut. I just want a slice of pizza, right? Whenever you fast. So what is fasting? Fasting is you just don't eat. Have you ever done this? You just don't eat. And for a period of time to set aside for prayer. And it might be one meal. You could do it a day. The longest I have fasted is 3 days. So there's scales to this. But the purpose is to pray, to narrow down your distractions. You got one thing you're worried about. I'm hungry. And you are teaching yourself, you're narrowing yourself down, and you are practicing saying no to something and depriving yourself of something. And what happens is an exchange of self-discipline, power, and strength, where you start to realize you are more powerful in the Holy Spirit than you often give yourself credit for. Fasting can introduce you to that you can defeat things that otherwise have taken priority wrongfully in your life. So I think fasting might come out of left field for you. I think it's a very effective way to reprioritize your life and to take control of your attention and your time and to say, no, I am in control of me and prioritizing what is important in my life. Now I just want to close again with that verse in Psalm 119, verse 143, where it says, as pressure and stress bear down on me, I find joy in your commands. And isn't it interesting, maybe counterintuitive, that commands or rules would bring about freedom? Because we often think that rules limit our freedom, if not eliminate our freedom. But I was just listening to a podcast the other day where they were talking about how if you want to have freedom, you have to have some structure. If you have no structure, there's really no freedom. You must have some structure in order to have freedom. And they gave this example of like playing a game. What if you were to play a game with no rules? And I were to say, hey, let's play a game. There's no rules. You make the first move. And you're like, to do what? And I'm like, there's no rules. You do whatever you want. And you're like, but what's the game? And I'm like, there's no rules, right? It's very confusing. And you think, well, I don't know what to do, and then there's really no game to play. It's not until the rules are introduced that you can actually do something. Like if you just have a field, an unmarked field, there's no way to score. But as soon as you mark out the boundary lines and the end zone, there are limitless ways to score a touchdown. And if you just have a surface, there's nothing to do, but as soon as you put 64 squares and pieces onto that board, now there are limitless ways to win a game of chess. And I just tell you that because there are ways and methods to live that God promises bring structure to your life that will help you experience joy and freedom under pressure. And we often think of them as like the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments. The commandment to don't commit adultery. Oh, God, I wanted to commit adultery. Why can't I commit adultery, right? And you think about that. Well, now you get to experience longevity in your marriage. You get to experience joy with your kids and your grandkids and your great-grandkids and have a name that you want. There's a lot of freedom. There's a lot of strength in obeying that limiting rule. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. It was the Jewish principle that Saturday was supposed to be a day of rest, and that was their day of worship before Jesus resurrected on Sunday and kind of shifted that for Christians. But the idea of practicing Sabbath or a day of rest or some period of rest or saying no to some things so that you can heal, that's going to bring margin to your life because you limited yourself with what you're going to do. It brings freedom and margin. Don't murder. That's going to give you some freedom of not being in jail, right? Or don't steal. And like all the 10 Commandments, you start to think, oh, wow, these things really do produce freedom and joy in my life and in the life of others. Jesus summarized all 10 of those commandments down to 2 in Matthew chapter 22. And I just want to read this to you today. Jesus said this, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart. Put up a number 1, because this is the first thing that you must do. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And now hold up number 2. Make a little peace sign there. And the second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. The entire law and all the demands of the prophets are based on these 2 commands. These 2 things. And so I wrote this down. The thing that wins the competition for your heart and your mind and your soul must be the thing that shows your love for God and your love for others. And not just the love for yourself. Because when you win the competition, time, heart, soul, you end up losing. And your family loses. And your God loses. And your neighbor loses. Because you prioritized yourself instead of prioritizing your God and your family and your neighbors. So, I hope that you experience some bracket busters this week. I hope the things that have been favored to win in your life, I hope they lose this week. Like maybe sinfulness has been winning in your life, or selfishness has been winning in your life. But today, as a result of thinking about this, you're going to have some upsets. And the things that have been lower seeds in your bracket are going to win. Because you are going to prioritize God and your family and then your work. And you are not going to see power in yourself. You're going to see the power of God's commands to bring joy. And Your family is going to win. And I know that other things have been winning, but your personal health is going to break the bracket this week, and you are going to win personally. Your neighbor is going to win because previously you have been justifying other things that have kept you from loving your neighbor. You say, no, my neighbor is going to win this week, and my God is going to win the competition for my heart and my mind and my soul. Because there is a way to be better under pressure, but that power does not come from ourselves. Our great power, it says, Paul says in 2 Corinthians, is from God, not from ourselves. We are pressed on every side by troubles, but we are not crushed. We are perplexed, but not driven to despair. We are hunted down, but never abandoned by God. We get knocked down, but we are not destroyed. We're going to pick it up there next week as we continue in this series.